Welcome to this explainer. When we think of ancient Greece, our minds usually jump straight to philosophers and flowing togas and grand marble temples, right? Well, today, we're actually digging into the literal dirt to explore a totally different foundation story. We're going to look at how Greece's incredibly rugged physical environment, combined with some absolutely massive prehistoric technological revolutions, created the literal and figurative bedrock for one of history's most famous civilizations. The deepest background of their social, material, and political history actually lies in the mountains and the Stone Age.
Listen to this incredibly dramatic quote from the 8th century BC poet Hesiod. He wrote that men go to sea because an income means life to wretched mortals, but it is a terrible fate to die among the waves. That right there perfectly captures the ancient Greek dilemma. So jagged was the Greek coastline that most settlements lay within just 40 miles of the sea. To survive, to build wealth, and to trade, the Greeks were forced to face the fierce, dangerous, and totally unpredictable Mediterranean waters. They really had no other choice.
So here is our roadmap for today. First, we're going to cover geography as destiny. Then, the Paleolithic survival game. Third, the Neolithic Revolution. And finally, rethinking prehistoric technology.
Okay, let's dive right into part 1, Geography as Destiny, the physical stage.
The harsh constraints of the Greek mainland are honestly staggering. When you break it down, only about 25%, at absolute most, of the mainland was actually arable or farmable. The other 75%? Just endless chains of rugged mountains and craggy terrain. This extreme scarcity of level ground completely ruled out raising cattle or horses on any large scale in most areas. Their environment was literally dictating the terms of their civilization from day one.
Because of those geographic constraints, the Greek diet and economy had to adapt fast. Wheat makes for tastier food for sure, but barley became their cereal staple simply because it survives in poor, rocky soil. Their core crops were wine grapes and olives. And by the way, olive oil wasn't just for cooking, it was their soap for bathing and even the base for their perfumes. Their livestock had to be small and hardy, so we're talking pigs, sheep, and goats. Interestingly enough, the domestic chicken didn't even arrive in Greece until the 7th century BC. And because resources were so irregular, wealth was super localized. Timber was largely deforested by the 5th century, but localized resources like the rich silver mines in Athenian territory directly bankrolled Athens' famous Golden Age.
The Greeks themselves were highly aware of their harsh environment. The philosopher Aristotle actually believed their specific Mediterranean climate, which was marked by baking dry summers and winters of boom and bust heavy rainfall, forged their unique political destiny. He argued that because they occupied this middle position between hot and cold climates, they enjoyed a perfect balance of energy and intelligence, and that balance, he claimed, allowed them to retain their freedom and create the best political institutions in the whole world.
But here's the catch. Aristotle's dream of Greek political unity was completely at odds with reality. Ancient Greece was never a united nation in the modern sense. Those rugged mountain chains we talked about fenced communities off from one another, creating severe political fragmentation. Yet, despite being divided politically, they were bound together incredibly tightly as a cultural entity. They shared language dialects, worshipped the exact same gods, and traveled to international religious and athletic festivals, like the Olympic Games. They were essentially a shared idea, living on a very fractured landscape.
All right, let's zoom back in time for part 2, the Paleolithic survival game, the early actors.
The human prehistory of Greece is incredibly vast. Neanderthals were actually roaming Greece 50,000 years ago. But around 45,000 years before the present, modern humans, Homo sapiens sapiens, began migrating into Europe and eventually replaced them completely. By 20,000 years ago, we see continuous human habitation beginning in places like the Franti Cave in southeastern Greece. This old Stone Age stretches all the way until about 10,000 BC. Daily life for these early hunter-gatherers was a relentless survival game. They lived in small nomadic bands of just 20 to 30 individuals. Labor was very clearly divided. Men hunted large game, which could take them pretty far from camp, while women gathered plants and nuts closer to home. And actually, the women provided the vast majority of the group's daily calories. Because everyone's labor was absolutely essential for survival, these groups were largely egalitarian, though older folks held high status due to their survival knowledge. And they weren't just surviving, they had rich, complex cultures. They created Venus figurines celebrating fertility, painted cave walls with religious awe, and buried their dead with red ochre. This shows early signs that some individuals held special prestige, which really foreshadows the social hierarchies of later Greek society.
Now, let's look at the major shift in Part 3, the Neolithic Revolution, the turning point.
This shift was essentially a massive demographic domino effect. Let's use that Franthi cave we mentioned as a perfect micro-example. Over thousands of years, the climate changed and sea levels rose, wiping out the nearby grazing plains. The residents literally couldn't hunt large game anymore, so they adapted. They started relying on seafood and wild plants like lentils and oats. Eventually, to secure a reliable food supply, they figured out how to plant seeds. This created a massive feedback loop. Agriculture led to population growth, which then required more intensive agriculture to feed all those extra mouths.
The results of this agricultural revolution were simply staggering. Because they had to stay in one place to farm, humans began building permanent settlements. By 8000 BC, Jericho in the Near East had 2,000 people and a massive defensive wall. Soon after, farming reached Greece, leading to villages with actual basements. Over in Anatolia, a settlement called Catalyuk housed up to 6,000 people. With surplus food, specialized artisans emerged. Some were even smelting copper at 700 degrees Celsius. By 3000 BC, the Greeks were constructing massive, multi-story structures like the House of Tiles at Lerna.
So this brings us to a completely transformed society. The Paleolithic world of small, egalitarian, nomadic bands was totally gone. In its place, late Neolithic society was defined by permanent settlements, which naturally required planning for irrigation and regulating trade. This need for organization birthed social hierarchies and leaders. Certain households became wealthier through farming or trade, completely shattering the old egalitarian structures and introducing wealth inequality.
Here is the really crucial point, though, how this technological shift fundamentally altered gender roles. Sometime after 4000 BC, farmers introduced heavy plows dragged by animals. Because this required immense physical strength, and because expanding herds of cattle and sheep had to be grazed far from the village, men took over these specific roles. Women, meanwhile, became tied to the permanent settlements. They needed to raise more children to provide labor for these intense farms, and they were tasked with the incredibly labor-intensive processing of secondary animal products. We're talking making cheese and yogurt from milk and spinning wool into cloth. Over time, the tasks assigned to men were given greater social prestige. This technological shift accidentally birthed the gender inequality that became a foundational, baked-in ingredient of later ancient Greek culture.
Which leads us to our final act, Part 4, Rethinking Prehistoric Technology, the Plot Twist.
For a really long time, historians had a very specific, set narrative about how Europe got its technology. But in the late 1960s, scientific techniques like radiocarbon dating, which measures the radioactive decay of carbon-14, and dendrochronology, which is the counting of tree rings, were heavily refined. These tools allowed archaeologists to date prehistoric finds with incredible precision, and what they found completely upended the history books.
Before these advanced dating methods, the dominant idea was the diffusion theory. Scholars just assumed that prehistoric Europeans were basically passive copycats who slowly learned all major technologies, farming, giant stone architecture, metallurgy, by copying the advanced civilizations of the Near East and Egypt. But the new scientific dating proved that while agriculture likely did diffuse from the Near East, many other massive leaps forward were the result of independent innovation. European populations were inventing key technologies entirely on their own. Prepare to have your mind blown by some of these scientific realities. European cattle, domesticated independently. Those giant European megalith tombs, science proves they were built before 4000 BC, which makes them over 1,000 years older than the Egyptian pyramids. And Stonehenge wasn't built by visiting architects from the East, it was a completely local construction. Incredibly, by the 4th millennium BC, metalsmiths in the Balkans were figuring out how to cast copper and alloy bronze at the exact same time as smiths in the Near East. Prehistoric Europe was brilliantly innovative on its own. Which brings us to our final thought for this explainer. We've seen how the unyielding mountains of the Mediterranean and seemingly simple inventions like the animal-dragged plow accidentally forged the complex social and political structures of ancient Greece. It really makes you wonder, if their world was shaped so profoundly by their physical environment and their technological leaps, how are our own modern environments and incredibly rapid technological revolutions shaping the social hierarchies of our world today? Definitely something to think about as you navigate your own physical and digital landscapes. Thanks for joining me.